Welcome, everyone. Super excited to have you all here for the launch of our competency-based education live event, competency-based education, the what, why, and how. I'm here with Liz Huttner-Lone. Liz, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Liz Huttner-Lone. I'm co-instructor for this MOOC, and I also work with a team of people who we'll talk about later, and I'm really glad to meet you guys all in the live event today.
So for those of you who are live, very grateful to all of you who've introduced yourselves to us. Thanks for letting us know who you are and where you're from and what kind of role that you have in your school or organization. And for those of you who haven't introduced yourselves yet, please go ahead and do so. And then for those of you who are watching this as a recording afterwards, thanks for participating and super glad to have you here. We just want to take a few minutes. For us, it's the morning, but for you, it's whatever time it is. Some of you actually are probably up quite early if you're joining us from Hawaii and some other places like that. And some of you are probably getting ready to go to bed in South Africa and things like that. So
good morning, good evening,
good
night.
Wherever you are in the world, thank you. We're going to tell you a little bit about some of the logistical details of the course, some of our vision and mission from the course. We'll answer whatever questions you have. If you have anything that you want to talk about, please put it in the chat window and we'll try to get to everyone's questions about what the course is and why we made it and how we hope people use it and how you can be successful and all those kinds of things. And we'll answer some of them here live online, and then lots of them we can also answer just by having folks chatting with each other and with some of the other staff working on the course. There are about 3,500 people who have registered. There are about 1,300 people who clicked something in the course last week. So welcome to all of you. You represent 130 different countries. I think so far we've had 6 or 7 represented already here today in this live event, but Mohammed just pinged in from Saudi Arabia, so that adds one more. Thank you. You represent all different kinds of folks. There are teachers and graduate students, superintendents, instructional designers, publishers, school leaders, researchers, consultants, all kinds of folks who are interested in competency-based education. From reading the forums, it sounds like people are at very different levels. There's a handful of participants in the class who are like national leaders in competency-based education. We're grateful to have you here. There are some folks who are working in organizations that are just very much starting conversations about these things. And then interestingly to us, it sounds like there are people at sort of all sorts of stages in between, folks who are in the midst of trying things in places where conversations are going. Really great to have this wide range of experience. We always say that you're absolutely as likely to learn more from the other participants in the course than you are to learn anything from us. So I hope that you'll connect yourselves with one another, listen, engage with each other, and be connected that way. Our first logistical suggestion is that we encourage you to take the course entrance survey. It's incredibly helpful for us to get a sense of who the learners are as they're coming in. And so you'll find that early on in the course tour if you haven't taken that survey yet. It doesn't take that long. It's extraordinarily helpful to us. Please do so. What other notes do you have, Liz?
Yeah, so I've got a few other notes. First of all, it looks like a bunch of people just joined us. Hi to the ones that just joined us. We're just getting started. We're so glad to have you today. So one thing I wanted to talk about is this course was made with support from XQ. So XQ is a nonprofit institute that's been involved in a lot of projects around school change and school innovation. And we are so thrilled that they've presented an opportunity for learners to earn a free certificate. So please go in the course, you'll see it on the top nav, the page called Want to Earn a Free Certificate to earn more. And we really hope that for those of you for whom this opportunity is right, we'll definitely take advantage of it.
And then who else is helping us make the ship sail?
Yeah, that's great.
Liz is the captain of the ship. And I'm in the crow's nest. Who else is on the ship?
Yeah, so there's lots of people on the ship who have been so important to making this course work. So we have 2 instructional designers on our staff. We've got Kelly Hirsch and Abby Maxon Carter. We also
who have both introduced themselves in the chat.
Yeah, and also you can talk with them directly, which is great. So we've had some very talented video producers working on this course. So in-house, we've got Garrett Beasley here at MIT, and we also have Amy Corrigan and her team at Fresh Cognate, who are also producing video for us. And also on the research side, we have Josh Littenberg Tobias as well. So it's a really strong team. It definitely takes a village to make a MOOC.
Josh has some undergraduate students like Marvez, who's working with us, who might reach out to some of the learners and invite them to participate in interviews or focus groups or things like that. So if you get messages from an MIT.edu email asking you to tell us about what you're up to, we hope you'll participate in that, although you're free to choose not to, but we hope you will.
That's great. So let's see. I'm actually going to head off and I'm going to go in the chat so that I can answer some questions and stuff.
That's great. Do you have any parting advice for our learners? If you're for people who are, this is their first MITx course, what advice would you have for them for being successful?
Sure. Yeah. So I've definitely been thinking about MOOCs a lot. I've made a few of them at this point, and I think that your classes are a wonderful resource. You know, read the introductions, like message someone, join a discussion around videos, like talk to the people in your class. You can learn so much from their experiences, whether they're similar to yours or different. So that's definitely something I'd advise all of our learners to do.
Cool. All right. So Liz is going to jump into the forums and hang out with some folks. I'll give you a few other ideas sort of along those same lines. So connecting with each other is a terrific way to learn. There's lots of stuff that happens in the forums, and it's pretty much impossible for anyone except for some of our staff to like totally keep track of everything. Some options there are use the search function and see if you can search for some keywords that you're interested in. So search for Philadelphia or independent school or dyslexia or biology or other kinds of terms that connect to some of your interests, and see if you can find other learners with similar interests or similar contexts. Connect with us and each other on social media. So we have a pretty active presence on Twitter. We have an account which is @MOOCsTSL, which is for the most part run by Abby with the support from the rest of us. And you'll get lots of great retweets and connections to other things that are recently published. You can find me on Twitter at @BJFR, and you can connect with everyone at the hashtag CBEMOOC. So those are great ways to find each other online. And you know, we're really excited to hear the things you're reading, the things that you're seeing, the ideas you have, the reactions you have. So you know, try to make those make your thoughts available in whatever way you're comfortable. We have a Facebook page that's out there. There are lots of ways of connection. What other ideas do you have about taking this course? You should, if at all possible, we encourage you to take the course with colleagues. There's still plenty of time for people to join. If you've already started a learning circle in your community, if you've gotten together a group of folks to meet with you regularly in person while you're taking the course, we think that's a terrific idea. If you haven't done so yet, it's not too late. So we would definitely encourage you to do that. You know, as you're trying to sort of talk to people about what this course is and what we're trying to do, I would say the target audience that we most have in mind are folks who are sort of starting conversations in their community about what competency-based education is, about why it might be valuable, about some of the challenges and obstacles that are associated with it, and about whether it's a good fit as a strategy for the community that you're working with. We try to create a learning experience where you can hear from folks who are advocates of competency-based education, where you can hear from folks who have concerns and questions about it, where you can go into some schools at various stages of adoption. So Crosstown High is a brand new school that with support from XQ is starting a journey that has competency-based education at the heart of it right from the beginning. And then you get to visit the Noble High and Montpelier High School, two schools out here in northern New England that have been working on this for a while and can give you a feel for what a more mature, though certainly not finished, program looks like. The course isn't a sort of step-by-step CBE manual. It's not going to say, okay, so first do this and then do this and then do this. In fact, the main thing that we want you to produce at the end of the course is some kind of artifact, a set of slides, a working paper, a memo, a video, whatever it might be that would help you engage other people in your community about competency-based education, either saying, here's why this is a great idea and why we think it's the right direction for us, or here's why I don't think competency-based education is right for us, but here are some sort of problems and challenges in education it raises, and here are some of the ways that we can address and tackle those challenges. So as you have other questions, there's a request to speak a little bit more slowly, which I can totally do. Thanks for the suggestion. I get excited because we're all working and learning together, and it's really fun. One of the themes that comes up early talking about competency-based education is that there are lots of definitions that are out there. So some people, in fact, some of the people that we filmed in the course describe what they're doing as proficiency-based education or mastery-based education. There are other connections to personalized learning and a few other sort of related terms like that. It's kind of tricky to keep track of the different terms that people use, and sometimes, and also not everyone uses each of those terms consistently. Generally speaking, what we found is that most of these kinds of definitions have a few components underneath them. And so if you sort of try to dig into anybody who's using a term, figure out like, what are the 3 or 4 things that are really essential to that? For most definitions of competency-based learning, there's some idea that there's got to be some set of competencies that have been defined that we can clearly articulate what we hope students learn, what it looks like when they do those things well, that there's a set of assessments that are involved that are sort of constantly tracking where students are at, and that we have some sense of where students are in some trajectory of learning that we say, okay, they're here, and our goal is to help support them to get them to there. And then there's usually some sense of autonomy that students have in either choosing their pathways towards demonstrating those learning competencies, or how they want to demonstrate those learning competencies, or other things like that. And then people have other kinds of definitions and components as well. We've generally found it's useful to sort of be pretty capacious about listening to different voices who use different terms and sort of picking and choosing among them and figure out, okay, so which of these ideas in there are helping us get new insights along these kinds of things. What are some other questions that have come up here? Patricia Southern last, for the artifact, is the content of the course under Creative Commons license if we want to replicate the resource templates, etc. for the artifacts? And the answer to that is yes. Everything in our course is available under a Creative Commons license. We would strongly encourage you to take anything you find in the course. You can remix it and use it for your own artifacts, but you can also remix and reuse things in any way you choose to support the professional learning of the communities that you're part of. So part of our goal in building these courses is making them really useful for people from lots of different contexts. And then Liz notes that some of the things that we link to are not necessarily licensed under a Creative Commons license, so that's sort of good to be aware of as well. What are some other general recommendations that I have for learners that are participating? It's really useful to set aside some time to take the course. If you haven't yet surrendered and blocked out some times that you're planning on watching the videos, doing the exercises, meeting with colleagues, things like that. I think one of the best ways that you can sort of set yourself up to be successful in persisting in the course is to mark out some time now for you to be able to do that. And then again, doing it, it's totally fine and great to take the course by yourself. But if you have some colleagues to take it with you, then they can be a good sort of support network. And also, as what you're doing in the course, as it leads to new experiments you want to do or conversations that you want to have, having a few allies with you is a great way of sparking that actual change in your classrooms. People will invest different amount of time in the course. And that's okay. So there are some folks who will come in and sort of breeze through and check things out. We find that there are some people who go, wow, this is really like a useful tool for anchoring my professional learning this semester. And they get pretty involved and spend a bunch of hours doing things. We hope that the people who are sort of most invested in the course, the amount of time that they're spending on it pretty much overlaps with other kinds of professional responsibilities that they have. So hopefully it feels like doing the work of this course as much. We don't want the course to be something where you feel like I go and I learn a bunch of stuff online outside of my school, and then sometimes 6 weeks later I start thinking about how it might apply or be relevant inside of school. Our hope is that you take the course and it makes you go, oh, there's a conversation I want to start or a thing I want to try this week or next week, and then I'll bring things that I'm learning back into the online course and get some feedback from my peers online, and then I'll go back and try something new and some way of building upon that inside school. We hope the course feels very much job embedded. Deborah has this question of decaying grade averages versus weighted averages, which is a great question that comes up around grading. To what extent should we be evaluating students based on an average of their proficiency over time? And then to what extent should we be evaluating students giving more weight to the most recent performances? Like if a student is not very good at factoring polynomials for 6 weeks, and then they get really good at factoring polynomials, does it matter that they weren't good at it for a while? Should we average that in, or should we just say, oh, now that they're good at factoring polynomials, who cares how long it took them to learn that? I think that's a great question. To me personally, part of what makes competency-based learning compelling is the idea that that we would give sort of more credence to where folks are at a particular moment in time than we would in the past. That we're sort of focused less on the path that people get to things and more on the sort of present of where folks are at. And then there are other folks who have other perspectives on that. I think one of the best things to do is to try to, find sort of relevant videos or other relevant places in the course and see if you can spark some conversations with other people in the class. Deb's saying in the chat that she's a social studies teacher, which is terrific. I was a 9th grade world history teacher. I taught electives to seniors myself. And I think one of our schools has a social studies class that we feature in our history class that you can look into and see sort of how they're doing things. And Deb's point being great that some subjects seem to be more cumulative over time. Some have sort of loops through them, and the exact nature of each course, how you structure the content, and those kinds of things might be quite relevant for how you make some of these different kinds of decisions. And of course, it's quite challenging these systems are sort of challenging to build. They're even more challenging to build if you say, oh, maybe we should do one thing in social studies and we should do a different thing in science and math and so forth. Frederick raises a point that building systems to more precisely measure where students are at any given point starts getting pretty complicated, and that definitely seems to be a theme that cuts across many of the schools that we look at. That the systems that they build for supporting competency-based learning can be complicated, can be challenging, and they can be complicated to communicate to different stakeholders and different partners. If you try to simplify things by having sort of more commonality across different parts of a system, then each of those parts will feel a little bit more jagged. If you let everyone customize to the extent that they would like to, then you're sort of increasing the complexity in the system. There's probably not single right answers to those kinds of questions for any institution, but these are the kinds of questions and dilemmas that we hope people will wrestle with. And we hope we'll give you some examples of places that have come to at least tentative solutions or responses to some of those questions, and you can test those ideas sort of against your own institutions. For those of you who are working with adults or universities or things like that, we're totally thrilled to have you here. We do have some focus in the work that we do in our lab on the K-12 system. And so we're excited to have you join us, but also, and there may be at various places some links and other kinds of things that might point you to different references and different sources, but you'll definitely find that that our examples are drawn from K-12, and most of our questions and our exercises are focused on K-12, but we have lots of learners in our other classes who've still found it valuable. Josh Duggan asks a terrific question, which I think could be, a great unifying question for something that you organize throughout all of these conversations, which is, how is this different to coursework that exists today? I think as we look at the implementations that we see of competency-based education, there are some things that we see that go, wow, that is kind of a really nice way of doing an implementation. There are ways that you really focus on like what you want learners to know and how you're going to help and support them to get there. They're probably, I think of the schools that we visit, there probably aren't ones that we feel like are totally transformative. You couldn't possibly imagine this happening. It's completely different from what you'll see before. But I think you'll see them as both like, in some cases really effective refinements of existing school elements. And another thing that you'll find is that some of the things that are central to competency-based education can also be found in schools and other systems that don't describe themselves as competency-based. I think that's one of the neat findings from the 3 research reports, for instance, that we shared in one of our sections, is that some of the things that competency-based education schools see as really central to their model can also be found in schools that are not featured as competency-based education. Anytime you're asking questions about pedagogy or curriculum or technology and education, asking that question, so what's new here, is usually a really useful question. There's usually lots of ideas in education that have deep historical roots. In fact, we brought in a historian from the University of Maryland, Ethan Hutt, who I think has some really great insights on some of the historical pieces or connections to historical ideas here. And so hopefully you find that valuable. Mustafa asked the question about CBE in different global environments. And whether you're in South Africa or Brazil or in Idaho or in New Mexico, there are lots of contexts that we actually don't know very well. There's a lot that our team here knows about Northern New England, and I'm pretty lucky to, and New England broadly, I'm pretty lucky to be able to visit lots of schools around the country and to a lesser extent around the world, but there's no one who will know your local context better than you. And so, in terms of how do things work, if your particular challenge is that your classrooms have 40 or 50 students in them, there are going to be some places in the United States that have that challenge. The teachers in LA Unified have been on strike in the United States, sort of discussing some of those kinds of things. What was else I was going to say? And they're common, those are common challenges in other parts of the world as well. They are actually not challenges that you'll find in the two schools that we feature in northern Maine and northern Vermont. So part of the challenge that all of us have in learners in these kinds of experiences is saying, okay, what do we have? What can we take from the examples that we see here? How do we sort of test them against our own particular local context and see what we can learn from them? So one person who we want to make sure that we introduced but didn't mention before is Ben Owens. So Ben is a fabulous educator who helped develop a school in Western North Carolina that was a competency-based program. And then has been working with us over the last few months to help develop this course. He's also now the community TA for the course. So you'll see him sort of spread throughout the discussion forums and interacting with folks. And he's got a great sort of set of mental references and a bunch of ideas that he can take into account as well. And so he'll be really useful for us in answering some of these questions and things like that. And as Deborah says, he shares great stuff on Twitter, so he's a terrific person to follow. So what are some other questions? Same asks, how much has the concept of metacognition been managed and taken into account in CBE education and studies? I think I haven't seen it much in the sort of research literature on it framed as metacognition, but certainly to the degree to which we expect students to be able to have more independence and autonomy in sort of charting their own learning pathway, the more that we would expect them to have to be able to develop skills like metacognition that help them think about thinking, that help them be reflective learning practitioners. So I think the schools that are doing implementations are certainly thinking, even if they're not using the term metacognition, questions like, how do we prepare learners to do good self-regulated learning? What kinds of supports or scaffolds do they need to be successful at that? Let me just scroll up here and see if there are other questions that I missed here. Deborah earlier had asked the question, should there or should there not be a one-size-fits-all policy within a district? And hopefully the way that I try to answer that is to say that one size fits all sorts of things have the benefits of some coherence and some consistency, and they can help create some simplicity. But that simplicity can sort of rub uncomfortably against individual cases which have different needs. And then letting things vary more across contexts can work really well in accommodating different needs, but it can make whole systems sort of much more complicated. So there's different. Jennifer Davids asked the question, how is CBE different than just good differentiation? And I would say, again, that is a great question to be asked throughout looking at the materials we have. To what extent do things that go by other names solve the problems that CBE describes itself as solving. Some of the distinctions I would think CBE advocates might say is that differentiation doesn't always sort of sufficiently account for really clearly articulating what the learning objectives are, and differentiation doesn't always account for giving people some choices about how they want to develop and demonstrate their understanding. But your definition of good differentiation might sort of encompass all of the things that already fit into competency-based education. So one useful exercise would be to sort of look at some of these definitions of competency-based education, break them down, look at some of the definitions of differentiation. Maybe another thing to say is I think people who talk about differentiation typically think of it as a property of a teacher, that a teacher in any given system should be able to take what they're doing and differentiate it to different students in different contexts. I think CBE tends to be described as a property of systems. That to some extent an individual teacher can do some experiments with competency-based education, but really an individual teacher by themselves can't sort of fully implement a competency-based education system. It's the property of schools or districts or some kind of larger unit. What are the linkages between student-centered teaching, active learning, internships, apprenticeship, experimental learning, work-based learning, and CBE? You won't get every one of those connections in this course, but you'll see some examples of that, particularly actually in all three of the case studies that we look at. So for Crosstown High, they have some strong commitments to both the project-based learning and to competency-based education. And they're trying to figure out how do those two things weave together. There are some community-based learning that have been happening at Montpelier High for a long time that they wanted to make sure get preserved. And so thinking about how those kinds of systems fit into other kinds of systems, I think it's one larger version of the question that Career Advisory Tools International suggests is, if there are things that are really great about our schools that we're excited about that don't fit under the rubric of competency-based education, how do they mesh with competency-based education? And there's no single answer to those things, but I think they're neat examples of people trying to do some of those things. Sharla Sava at the Ed Institute Blended Learning Director asks, what are the cool research on learning sciences or teaching systems at MIT that might inform the approach to competency-based education? And there's basically two big themes of research that we have going on in our lab, and then one that's probably relevant from some of our colleagues. So we're really interested in online and blended learning for teachers and educators. I mean, part of the reason why we offer these courses is that so we can figure out how to design them well across lots of different topics and figure out how people learn in them. One of our sort of fundamental guiding principles is the idea that we think all around the world, people want to see more ambitious teaching and learning happening in classrooms. They want to see less recitation. They want to see fewer, less passive learning, more active, engaged, student-centered learning. And we think the only way that'll happen is if we can dramatically increase the quantity and quality of teacher learning throughout teachers' lifetimes. And we think online and blended learning will play a really important role in that because teachers' lives are complicated. They have busy schedules. They're engaging with kids throughout the day. Not that online and blended learning should replace face-to-face learning, but it's one useful tool. A second theme that we're really interested in is we think teachers often have insufficient opportunities to practice. So when teachers learn, it tends to be listening or engaging in discussions, and there aren't enough opportunities to sort of do the work of teaching while learning about teaching. So we try to do that to some extent in these courses by encouraging people to take what they're learning and doing activities and assignments that get them out in schools and engaging with people. But we have a whole nother body of work that's about creating practices, which are different kinds of games and simulations that let teachers rehearse for and reflect on important decisions of teaching. We have another set of colleagues led by a researcher, YJ Kim, who are interested in ideas of playful assessment, which is basically a couple of different things, but in new learning environments like maker spaces, how do we do a good job of measuring what students are learning, especially when those constructs are kind of complex to learn, or to assess, like risk-taking and things like that. And then they also have a neat set of projects about how would you create learning environments that feel playful, but do a good job of letting us draw inferences about how well people are learning. So sort of game-based learning and stealth learning and things like that. You can find out more about some of those things by going to tsl.mit.edu. Some of them will be woven into the course, but we tend not to feature a ton of the work that we do on our own in these courses. We tend to sort of mostly feature really interesting things that are happening in the field. Maybe too much. Maybe we should be a little less shy and deferential. So a bunch of other questions and things here. Marisha asks, have you considered a multidisciplinary approach, drawing on other subject areas like philosophy, ontology, and psychology to explore or enhance CBE? I don't necessarily know that we've done that. Probably the subject that we've drawn most on is history, bringing in Ethan Hutt to help us think about sort of where some of these systems have come from, how change has happened historically in education, why certain parts of our education system, like the credit hour and the Carnegie unit, have proven to be durable over time. So we've found some of those connections to be useful. There probably is you'll probably get some references to kind of learning science and some other sorts of things. One finding which is pretty well established that we come back to in a couple of places in the course is that when kids are given their own autonomy about the pace at which to learn, there are lots of students who will not choose a sufficiently challenging pace for themselves. There are some students who will. There are some students who will if given the right sort of internal assessments, but not necessarily. But it's a signature challenge to really think about, especially if we're concerned with equity. If we think that there are some students who, when given more autonomy, will choose to move at an insufficiently challenging pace for themselves, then can systems that encourage more personalization actually lead to widening inequalities rather than narrowing them? Yeah, we've had a few folks ask about adult learning in CBE, and I discussed this a little earlier. I think the thing that we will say is that we're, generally speaking, we've been focused more on thinking about K-12 systems throughout our courses. And all the courses that we've offered, we've had folks that done adult education, we've had folks that done universities and things like that. Higher education and so forth, and we welcome those folks in our courses. We think that they tell us that they have valuable learning experiences to help set some boundaries on what we're working on. We mostly tend to, most of our examples and most of the resources in the course will be about K-12, but to the extent that those are helpful, and we can sort of try on the margins on Twitter. I saw Kelly earlier sharing some resources and things like that, and so that's great. So after, there will be a kind of notes after the live event. When we send around the recording, we'll make sure that we share some of the links and other kinds of resources that are out there. We know that the chat window is an imperfect place for sharing some of these kinds of things. And then, maybe the last point to say is that, like, for those of you who are bringing up really critical questions about competency-based education or anything that we're saying, we absolutely welcome those critical questions. The only way that systems do a good job implementing new ideas is if they're critical and challenging of those new ideas. We're pretty confident that there are some places that are out there that feel like their efforts at implementing competency-based education have helped them create better learning experiences for their students. The broad research scan of this arena is, and there are a handful of places out there that have made moves towards competency-based education that have gotten real pushback from community stakeholders and parents and things like that. And we can learn from all of those different kinds of examples. So thanks, everyone, for spending some time with us here, wherever you are in the world. It's exciting. There are 87 folks who are online right now. We've probably gotten 25 or 30 of them to say hello in the forums, or in the chat window here, which is great. We hope you'll continue to engage each other in the forums, engage us online in Twitter and other kinds of things. We hope that these kind of critical dialogues can continue over the next few weeks. We'll have at least one other live event that happens throughout the course of the course, and lots of opportunities to continue to engage online. So thanks to all of you who are learning with us, for all the different staff who are participating in the course. we will take the last question from Patricia Sutherland, which is the U.S. is further ahead than Canada. Are there other jurisdictions? And I would say a couple of good places to look at CBE are Australia has experimented with these things. Actually, around the world, a variety of different countries at various times in history have experimented with CBE. And so there may even be provinces in Canada that in the 60s or 70s or 80s have some deep dives into these things. Scandinavia had some of this work in the past. And then it's not exactly the same, but the medical field has a lot of good insights into this because there is some strong competency-based education in a variety of parts of that. I'm going to go drink some tea. Thanks to those of you who wished well, and really excited to be in conversation with you all for the next few weeks. Thanks so much for being here today.